Anders starts now.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
Why do Catholics worship Mary?
What's stopping you?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest? Where is purgatory in the Bible?
What's stopping you?
I think the Pope has too much authority.
What's stopping you? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion. This is the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. Those of you who are watching EWTN, listening to EWTN radio, and you're thinking, I used to be an active Catholic back in the day, but something happened or my life changed, and for whatever reason I fell away from the church, and now I'm kind of interested in getting back, but there's this one thing. Well, what is that one thing? We'd love to talk about that with you. Maybe you've never been a Catholic, but you hear about Catholicism in the news, or perhaps you've got a good friend who is an active Catholic and they seem very happy to be an active Catholic. So you've got questions as well. Love to hear from you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening outside of North America, please dial the U.S. country code and then 205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. And of course, those of you watching on TV can participate as well. We have an email address for you, and that is ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. We'd love to hear from you today. Charles Beery is our producer. Ryan Penny is our phone screener. We also have Jeff Burson on social media. He'll be glad to forward any questions you might want to pose via YouTube or Facebook Live to us here in the radio studio. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
You know what? Doing great. How about you, my friend?
Hanging in there, thank you.
Glad to hear that. We're going to lead off with an anonymous email. This person says, is divorce ever the solution to a 25-year-long sacramental covenant union, which is no longer a priority to one of the partners?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. I don't know that I would use the word solution. Civil divorce can be, is not always, but can be permissible if there is a grave harm that could occur to one or the other partners if we don't have recourse to this very tragic outcome. So here's an example. Let's say you're validly married to somebody in the eyes of the church, but they become like a violent person, and they are trying to kill you or something, or they get on drugs or start practicing the occult or do some horrible thing, or they are sort of serial infidelity to make it absolutely either morally or physically impossible to live at peace in the same home with them, and they're absolutely not repentant, and you may actually need to invoke the civil authority for protection.
I see.
You see, I mean, this is the kind of situation where, divorce is clearly a tragic outcome, but it may be necessary to preserve the life or the welfare or perhaps the spiritual integrity of the home. Now, a civil divorce does not end a valid marriage. It doesn't end a valid marriage. So, in the eyes of the church and God, you're still actually married to that person, but you've just had to physically separate because it's physically or morally impossible for you to be in the same place.
I have a friend, very dear friend, who is in that exact situation. Even though he and his wife have been divorced for many years, he still calls her his wife.
Sure. Now, what I would encourage people is that divorce is not the solution for your own subjective unhappiness. Right? I mean, because marriage is not about making me happy or making you happy. It's about serving something other than ourselves. And especially if you're talking about a sacramental marriage, that you're in an ecclesial state, and your marriage exists to serve the good of the church and of civil society. So you wouldn't walk away from that ecclesial state any more than a priest would say, I don't like this parish. I'm out of here. No, you made a promise This is your vocation. This is your mode of holiness and the way you're going to serve the church and God.
Very good, and we hope that's helpful for you. Thank you so much for your anonymous email. Here is a not anonymous email from Chuck. Chuck says, you have stated many times that Jesus' death was not a penal substitution, but rather a true atonement. So how do Catholics tap into the gift of Christ's sacrifice?
Oh, wonderful question. So what I would distinguish is a sacrifice of atonement or a sacrifice of reparation versus a penal substitution. And the Catholic Church does not regard the death of Christ as substitutionary punishment, as if God were somehow pouring out his wrath on an innocent person, namely Jesus, so he could then be clement and merciful to a bunch of unworthy people, namely us. That's the Protestant view. We think that Christ offered his life as a sacrifice, giving up something of value, a gift out of love to the Father, and that makes reparation for our sin. So how do we lay hold of the goods of that sacrifice and make them our own? Well, through the traditional means of grace, most especially faith, but also the sacraments, and then by our participation in the life of grace through acts of virtue, and especially private prayer.
Okay. Well, we thank you so much for that. Hopefully we have enough time to tackle this one. What is the Catholic stance on the evangelical sinner's prayer? This is from Jordan. Regarding the 4 spiritual laws, I'm wondering if the first 3 laws and the scriptures they attach to each are okay to pray as a prayer of conversion. Seems to be the conclusion in law number 4 that to be saved or born again, you must pray to ask Jesus to save you. What say you?
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So the origin of the sinner's prayer actually is in the 19th century, early 20th century with the evangelist D.L. Moody. Before Moody, even evangelical Christians didn't really conceive of salvation as a sort of mantra that you would recite or some sort of transaction that you could initiate on one-time basis and then just say these words and you're saved. That's really not even historic Protestantism, let alone historic Catholicism or biblical Christianity. D.L. Moody made that up because he had these big crusades. People would come, and he had these crusade workers that were trying to encourage people to be converted, and they needed to know what that looked like. So he said, well, here, get them to say this, and hand out these little tracts. Bill Bright of Campus Crusade really popularized that in this little yellow booklet called The 4 Spiritual Laws. And quite honestly, the 4 spiritual laws present himself as a kind of formula that if you just sort of do this little formula, recite these little words, then you're going to go to heaven. Now, your question is more about the theology of the laws themselves, the so-called laws. I'll come back to that after the break.
Very good. So, Jordan, if you're listening this afternoon, and we certainly hope that you are, do sit tight. We'll continue with that in just a moment. We'll also get to Matt in Lincoln, Nebraska, listening on YouTube. And we have a line open for you as well at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986 for Call to Conversion, Communion.
You know what's kind of mind-blowing about intercessory prayer? God generally only grants the prayers that fit what He wanted to do anyway. So what's the point of us asking? Why does He tell us throughout Scripture to ask for things in prayer? I think He chose to wait on our prayers to give us His blessings. And I think He chose that because He wants to share the joy of being distributors of His grace with us. He wants us, by our requests, to unleash His healing, His blessing, and His miracles in the world. It wasn't enough for Him to just bless us. He wanted to share the joy He has when He blesses with us by making us necessary parts of that blessing. Archbishop Fulton Sheen said that the graces of God are hanging from heaven by silken threads, and prayer is the sword that cuts them down. So ask God boldly for things today and share the joy of raining His grace down on a needy world. That's what intercessory prayer is about. Prayer changes things. Send us a message at connect@reallifecatholic.com. This is Chris Stefanik on EWTN Radio.
There will come a day when each of us will be asked to review the movie of our life and give an account to God. We will sorrowfully relive the bad times and joyfully revisit the good. Thankfully, no matter what you've done, there is hope, since Jesus came not to condemn the world, but to save it. So if you've been away from church for a while, we invite you to come home and find the peace that only comes from God. Visit CatholicsComeHome.org.
It's called to communion here on EWTN. I almost renamed the show on the spot to call it Call to Conversion or something. No. It is called to communion, I promise, with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. We'll get to the phones in just a moment here. We're going to continue with this email that we received from Jordan regarding the sinner's prayer.
Sure. So Jordan had asked about sort of the Protestant tradition of praying the sinner's prayer, and in particular, he asked about the theology in Bill Bright's little yellow booklet, The Four Spiritual Laws, and whether or not a Catholic could affirm those laws. And I began to say there's a difficulty with this program, right? Because it presents our relationship to God and our salvation as if it were something that could be accomplished by simply reading words off a page. Whereas, of course, Christ in the gospel tells us that our salvation depends on a radical transformation of our interior life. We actually have to become new people in Him and exhibit these dispositions, these virtues that He calls us to, like poverty of spirit and hungering for righteousness and peacemaking, all those things that He says in the Sermon on the Mount, and that those be manifest in acts of corporal and spiritual mercy, like feeding the hungry and clothing the naked. And that encompasses a lot more than just reading words off a page.
Sure.
Now, when it comes to the actual booklet, could a Catholic affirm the booklet? Well, there are some problems with it. Now, as stated, I mean, it gives you some good principles, like Christ is the provision for man's sin, and we have to receive Christ as Savior. Those things are true in a way, but not in the way that Mr. Bright intended them. So when if you say a person must receive Christ, well, that's true, we do. But what does the Scripture teach? What does the Catholic Church teach about receiving Christ? Well, initially we receive Christ. Actually, He receives us through baptism. St. Paul says we die with Christ in baptism and are raised again with Him to new life. But then it's not just a one-and-done kind of thing. We have to continually abide in Him and be nourished by Him. And the sacrament of that abiding is the Holy Eucharist. And Jesus said, whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me. And if you abide in me and my words abide in you, you'll bear much fruit. Well, that's an ongoing reality. It's not one and done, right? This is the memorial of His presence with us continually until the end of the age. And of course, Christ said we have to persevere to the end to be saved. So, do we receive Christ? Yes. But can we receive Him simply by reciting a little mantra in a yellow book? No. We have to receive Him by an ongoing participation in the life of the Church and the sacraments, baptism especially, and then continuing that dynamic, especially in the Eucharist and the sacrament of penance. And we have to persevere in that and in a life of charity, active good works, penance, and virtue, all the way to the end. So I would not give the four spiritual laws to someone except at grave risk of distorting their understanding of salvation and the nature of God. Okay.
And Jordan, thank you so much for your email. We hope that is of assistance to you. If you'd like to send us an email for a future show, please send that to ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. As promised, we're going to get to the phones in just a moment here. You know, in the first segment of the program, we answered an email regarding divorce, and that prompted Shar, who is watching us right now on YouTube, to get involved here. Shar says, I got a divorce because my husband was a drug addict. He wouldn't work. He was occasionally abusive to me. But I've always felt guilty because I didn't believe in a divorce. So was my divorce a sin?
Okay, thanks. So keeping in mind that I know very little about this relationship other than just what you've revealed to me here. Based on what you've recounted, I would say that this is precisely the kind of situation in which the Church would say perhaps a civil divorce is your only recourse, because clearly this individual is not at all living up to the demands of a sacramental marriage or the good of a husband, right? Yeah. And you cannot live in the home. You can't live in the home with somebody who is a drug addict. I mean, you can't do it. It's physically dangerous to you, because drug addicts, not only do they have these narcotics that can kill you, but they're usually enmeshed in a life of at least petty crime, and they have terrible associations. I mean, they're not getting their drugs from, reputable people. They're getting them from, very dangerous individuals. You have to separate yourself from that. You got no choice, right? So it's very probable even that someone who is in that frame of mind, who takes the vows of marriage, doesn't have any idea what they're saying, and certainly doesn't intend what they're saying. And so if you haven't already done this, I would strongly suspect that you've got grounds for a declaration of nullity, and I would actually approach the tribunal in your diocese and begin the annulment process. And then, this door will be closed, and you can walk away absolutely free.
Shar, thank you so much for checking us out today on YouTube. We do appreciate that. And if you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin with Matt in Lincoln, Nebraska, checking us out today, also on YouTube, a first-time caller. Hello, Matt. What's on your mind today?
Thank you so much, Dr. Anders, for taking our call today. I've been in many conversations with my Protestant brothers and sisters about several Catholic teachings like the Eucharist, Mary, and the Pope. And whenever we go to evidence in Scripture and in early church fathers, they do not know how to refute the evidence. They often change the subject at times.
Of course.
They say what they say is, what is most important is the simple gospel message, and the other topics don't actually matter as much. How would you respond to them?
Okay, so first of all, I appreciate the question. I think I would begin with, do they actually believe the teaching of Jesus is important? Do they think the teaching of Jesus is important? And you may say, well, that's a silly question. Of course they do. It's not a silly question. I used to be an evangelical Protestant, and the truth of the matter was, I really kind of discounted the teaching of Jesus. I thought that I understood the mind of St. Paul because I read Paul through the mind of Martin Luther, and my Bible could almost be reduced to 5 chapters, Romans 3 and 4 and Galatians 2, 3, and 4. And I thought kind of everything else had to be interpreted in light of Luther's interpretation of those few verses. And of course, Jesus doesn't fit well into Martin Luther's understanding of the gospel because he says a lot of things about the interior transformation of our moral life as a requirement for salvation. And of course, Luther didn't believe that, and so he had to kind of dismiss the teaching of Christ and said so, actually quite explicitly. So I would kind of go to the teaching of Jesus and say, okay, simple gospel, no problem. You know who else believed in the simple gospel? Francis of Assisi. Francis of Assisi. His entire spirituality was based around sort of radical obedience to the teaching of Christ, especially in the Sermon on the Mount. And that's also just a couple of chapters, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. That's the simple gospel. Yes, let's focus on that, the simple gospel. So then you have to have a conversation about what do you mean by the simple gospel, right? And obviously that's not what they mean. That's not what they mean. But another way of looking at this is to say, to say we have to emphasize the simple gospel is kind of like saying, I'm not going to mess with doctors and exercise and diet books. I'm just going to stick to simple health. Well, how are you going to get healthy? You got to do the right things.
Yeah.
So is salvation simple? Jesus says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. He does sort of remove a lot of the accoutrements, if you will, of Old Testament religion and ritualism, because he says in John chapter 4, the Father seeks those true worshipers who will worship him in spirit and in truth. But we need the support of the church and the sacraments that Christ gave us in order to attain to that life of true and spiritual worship. So if Jesus gives us the Eucharist, if Jesus gives us baptism, if Jesus gives us the teaching office of the church, if he gives us the sacrament of reconciliation, which he did when he said to the apostles, whoever sins you forgive are forgiven, he must have done this for a reason. Right? He didn't do it for no reason. Why did he do it? Because we need the supernatural grace of God. We need the help of God in order to attain to this life of interior righteousness. Simple to say, hard to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, thank you so much for your call. That opens up a line for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Call to communion here on EWTN. Glad you're with us today. Here now is Pat. Pat is in Columbus Grove, Ohio, listening on Holy Family Radio. Hey, Pat, what's on your mind today?
Yes, I'm Catholic, and I have a friend that became Catholic a year ago, and she was on vacation at the beach and came across some young people, and they got to talking, and she shared. She's, was a very strong evangelical, and she said, I didn't know what else to tell them. So she had asked them if they're ready to give their life to Christ. So they said yes. She said, "You want to do it right now?" And she said, "All I knew was the sinner's prayer that I learned, years ago." So she's asking, what, and then she encouraged them to go to a Catholic church, but she was wondering is there another way to approach this to strangers that you'll never see again?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate the question. So, I think it's helpful for people who have this strong evangelistic impulse, and if they've come into the Catholic Church from these Protestant denominations, and they're really used to sort of sealing the deal, if you will, with some sort of a evangelistic appeal that calls for a response.
Sure.
Exactly. They have that strong inclination. They feel like they hadn't done their job if they haven't sort of delivered that. Did Jesus ever ask anybody to pray the sinner's prayer? Jesus never did. He sometimes did call people to act in radically committed ways, to sell what they possessed and give to the poor, or come follow him, or let the dead bury their own dead. I mean, he said some pretty arresting things, but he didn't actually call people to pray the sinner's prayer, but he did call them to conversion and to penance. And the Catholics believe in conversion. We think you have to be converted from a life of sin to a life of grace. But we don't necessarily think that it can be easily identified by the singular moment in time, except insofar as you acknowledge baptism as the rite of entrance into the church. So I don't know that there's a thinking that I must get somebody to make some sort of psychological commitment, and I haven't done my job unless I've accomplished that. But that really doesn't trust in the providence or the intervention of God. Right? If you can get someone to think about God and the transformation of their moral life and hold out in front of them the prospect of Catholic life as the authentic domain in which to live that new life, then you've really done a tremendous thing. Just because somebody prays a prayer doesn't mean it'll stick, right?
Yeah.
But the thing about living a sacramental life is it's not a one-time commitment. It's an ongoing commitment. It's a life project. And that's really what we want to encourage people into. The Catholic Church has a concept of gradualism. It doesn't mean that everyone's conversion has to be gradual. What it means is we are happy if we can move someone even a step in the direction of virtue and away from vice. If you can cut down from 20 cigarettes to 10, it's a step in the right direction. Everything you can do to advance people a little bit more and a little bit more. But if you're really looking for a kind of definitive break with the world in Catholic life, that's always understood as baptism or penance. So if you feel the need to seal the deal, that's what you're aiming for. Not to just pray a prayer out of a booklet, but to actually move through the sacraments of initiation.
Pat, thank you so much for your call, and I really like the idea of the life project. That really resonates with me.
I didn't make it up.
You're a good man for bringing it up at this moment.
Jesus made it up.
There you go. It is Called to Communion here on EWTN. We have a couple of lines open for you at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Here's a question here from Sean, checking us out on YouTube. Sean says, would Dr. Anders encourage speaking about things such as Eucharistic miracles, apparitions, etc., to those who aren't persuaded by other arguments in the faith?
So that's a dicey question.
Yeah.
The other day I have a son that came home from school. He goes to a Catholic school, and he was really excited. He's a young kid because he had encountered some apologetical arguments connecting the faith and science, and it really just thrilled him to think that there was a sort of scientific and rational basis for things that he believed. And I said, well, okay, great. Give me the arguments. Like, what did you learn? And maybe it was just because he's a little kid and he didn't, have it all together in his head. But what he actually articulated to me, I didn't find it all that persuasive, as an argument. But it moved him, and I was happy about that. And so I kind of bit my tongue, right? I inside I was thinking, there are a lot better arguments, but I didn't say that. I kind of held that in. To the extent that there are true apparitions and miracles and things like that, they exist to move the hearts of believers and unbelievers alike to greater faith in God and His Church. And so we certainly don't discount that as a real factor that can draw people to God. I guess it would depend on the credibility of the claim. The harder it is to discount, the more persuasive it might be. I personally am more drawn towards demonstrative philosophical arguments, where in order to deny them, you have to deny some major premise that's very, very intuitive to our experience, like I exist, or I'm rational, or the universe makes sense. People can deny those, but at a much greater intellectual cost. It's not so hard to deny, I find, I don't believe that account of that miracle. Well, that's what this person said in the 12th century, but how do I know? I wasn't there, right? Mm-hmm. So those things can often be useful as sort of confirming evidences that render the faith more appealing or coherent. But at the end of the day, if someone's drawn to the Catholic faith through those things, there's no bad reason to become a Catholic.
No, not at all. Well, very good. And we thank you, Sean, for checking us out today on YouTube. In a moment here, we'll be talking with Bob in Albany, New York, listening online, EWTN.com. And if you're listening right now, we would love to hear from you if you have a question for Dr. David Anders about the Catholic faith. 833-288-EWTN is our number, 833-288-3986. Looks like 3 lines open at the moment here on Call to Communion on EWTN. Do stay with us.
Father John Riccardo.
When you and I wake up every day, do we strive to know Jesus or not? Quick question to you and me right now. Is that what you and I are doing every single day?
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
EWTN is now on Twitter. Get short, timely messages from EWTN on your computer or cell phone. It's easy to stay up to date on a wide variety of topics. Pro-life news, Vatican announcements, catechesis, apologetics, the latest EWTN programming, and more. You can link to EWTN on Twitter from our homepage or go to twitter.com/EWTN. At work, at home, at school, and on the road. Stay connected to your world with EWTN's Twitter page.
60 on 10 with Monsignor Charles Pope.
The second commandment, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. The disclosure of a name in the ancient world belonged to the order of trust and intimacy. And so when God revealed his name to Moses, it was an extraordinary outreach to us, saying that we were called to an intimate, trusting relationship with him. And so we should always reverence this name as a great gift. We should obviously never use God's name to curse or to blaspheme or to berate others. God's name is meant to bring blessing. And likewise, the vain use. Vain means empty. So some of these expressions like, oh my God, or and so on, need to be avoided as well. Vain means empty, and those are using God's name as an empty kind of expression of exasperation. And then finally, never ever to use God's name to swear an oath falsely. God is the God of truth. The second commandment, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain.
For more about the 10 Commandments, visit EWTNRC.com.
Tomorrow on More to Life, Simon Says.
Even Jesus needed a Simon of Cyrene. We'll help you help the people you love.
Now, back to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
It's Called to Communion here on EWTN. We do have a line open for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Here is Bob in Albany, New York, listening online, EWTN.com. Hey there, Bob. What's on your mind today?
Yes, hi. I have a question regarding, my wife and I are currently in conflict regarding the condition of a child's heart at birth. She contends that it's wicked and evil, and I was raised Catholic, and I'm just not seeing that. Can you clear that up for me?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. I'm sorry for the conflict. This is a difficult and painful one. So the belief that the hearts of infants are intrinsically evil and deserving damnation, of course, is not a biblical teaching. Nothing in Scripture says that. In fact, Jesus says, Matthew chapter 19, that the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these, and so they shouldn't be hindered in coming to Christ. So it's not from Scripture that they derive this teaching. It's actually from the Reformed or Calvinist tradition. So it's a tradition of man, not a biblical teaching, not one that God has revealed. And where the teaching came from really was that embedded in the Protestant hypothesis is this idea that we could never, ever do anything to merit God's favor, and that continues to be the case even after regeneration. So even after somebody's born again in the Spirit, so says the Protestant, even then all of our works, our righteous works, continue to be as filthy rags before God. Luther believed that even concupiscence, now what is concupiscence? Concupiscence is this immoderate desire that we have within us for bodily pleasure, right? I want to eat more pizza than is good for me. That inclination itself was imputable as sin. In other words, if you might never lift your hand to eat the pizza, but the fact that you actually wanted to eat more pizza than was good for you, Luther thinks means that you deserve eternal damnation.
Wow.
Well, we know, that, of course, none of this is biblical. Yeah. None of this is in Scripture. None of this is in sacred tradition. None of this is in the teaching of Jesus. But this is where it comes from, this idea. And now, are infants concupiscent? Do they have immoderate desires? Or maybe immoderate's the wrong word, but do they have desire? Do they have passions that are not regulated by reason? Of course, they're infants. They don't have any reason to speak of. They don't have language. They just little crying machines that just erupt into emotion because some felt need is not being met. And even Augustine recognized that in the Confession. See, he talks about, sort of our untamed passions evident from childhood. Well, if you regard that kind of activity as itself sinful, well, then, you're going to think infants are sinful because, these little balls of passionate emotion. And if you hold to this Protestant idea of total depravity, you're going to think that. So I guess the way to counter that, it's going to be tricky because it's intertwined with a whole theology of salvation and what it means to have a relationship with God. So more is at stake in this conversation than just the state of infants. It's really a conversation about the state of our own hearts and what is necessary to be made right with God. And so I kind of don't think you can separate those questions. I don't think you can deal with the infant question without dealing with the human question.
Sure.
And the salvation question, and the Jesus question, and the Protestant Catholic question. They're all kind of a piece. Now, it can be helpful, I think, to clarify the distinctions. If this is the Protestant understanding of the heart of infants and of total depravity and original sin, what is the Catholic understanding? Well, what the Catholic Church holds is that we fell in our first parents, Adam and Eve, and as such we lost this gift of original justice or original righteousness, this relationship that Adam and Eve enjoyed with God. And we come into the world without that relationship. We're not in intimate union with God when we are naturally born. We have to be reborn, spiritually reborn in baptism. And Jesus talks about that in John chapter 3. And we have wounds. We have wounds in our nature that incline us to sin. Concupiscence is one of them. And grace comes to heal those wounds. But the wounds themselves are not sins. They're just wounds.
Yeah.
They incline us to sin. But sin, moral culpability, is a human act, meaning it follows the deliberation of reason. So that might be another way to get at this question, to kind of get behind it and ask some questions like, well, do you regard, an inclination towards sin as sin?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, then that falls outside the domain of the will, right? Because my inclinations precede the acts of my will. Well, so if you think that I'm sinful before I've done anything, before I've chosen, before I've actually acted, then there seems to be no moral significance to our acts at all, and we're just automatons driven mechanically or fatalistically in a universe governed entirely by God. In which case, why are we even talking?
Yeah, for sure. Well, we do appreciate your call, Bob. Thank you so much for it. It is Called to Communion here on EWTN. Here is Angel now. Angel's listening in Muncie, Indiana, via Facebook, a first-time caller. Angel, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I was calling to inquire about if someone wanted to become Catholic. They were married, and their husband and them had both previously been married. So, say the wife, myself, wanted to become Catholic, and then the husband did not and would not do an annulment, could you still come into the Catholic Church?
Sure, thanks. So theoretically, yes, you're going to have to kind of walk through a thicket of issues with the priest, right? And you have to explain your situation to him and help you to kind of navigate that thicket. Because what would be preferable, of course, is just to say, look, you don't have to become Catholic. I understand that. You don't want to become Catholic, don't become Catholic. This is very important to me. And for the sake of my conscience, would you participate with me to the extent necessary so that I can have peace of soul? And could you do that for me, as an act of love? You don't have to follow me into the church, but respect the dignity of my own conscience and free choice. And hopefully we can make that appeal. Maybe he'd be willing to come talk to the priest about what would be necessary to get that job done. That's what would really be my preference. If he's absolutely not willing to participate, there are ways to slice that apple, so to speak. But you're going to have to kind of walk that through with your priest. But yes, it can be done. Using the word conscience, I think, will open some doors, right? Well, it can, if people are sensitive to that. Okay. Angel, thank you so much for your call. Call to communion here on EWTN. A line open for you right now? Yes, indeed. 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Here is Janae now in Ocala, Florida, listening on her iHeartRadio app. She's a first-time caller. Hey, Janae, what's on your mind today?
Hi, yes. So I've been trying to figure out the role and the vocation of women in the Catholic Church. I tried reading Pope John Paul II, but he's just so up there in intelligence that it's just beyond my grasp of understanding. And I was hoping you could explain it in a more regular person. Sure. Absolutely. I appreciate the question. You have to put away those $2 words, okay? I'm right there with you, with Pope John Paul. He's a wonderful guy, great pope, but man, he uses some big concepts sometimes. Yes. So I'm right there with you. So essentially what the Pope says is this: men and women are absolutely equal in dignity, 100% equal in dignity, co-partners in the work of redemption, salvation, family life, and all the rest of it. And women have every right to be involved in civil society and to make use of their gifts as men would, okay? So all that's familiar to us, even in the secular world. Here's where the Pope puts kind of a special Catholic shine on it, if you will. Women are not men. Men are not women. So while they're equal in dignity, they have different character, different dispositions, sometimes different gifts. And these gifts are complementary to one another. They're not contradictory to one another. And we should respect that. We should respect the fact that women and men, while co-equal in dignity, have, look, not to put too fine a point on it, they've got different bodies. And even those biological differences impose some necessity in the administration of justice. So let me give you a concrete example. If feminism, secular feminism, says, hey, women are just as good as men, they can beat you black and blue in the courtroom or the surgery or the political sphere. That's true. That's true, they can, and often do. Sure. But can they do it without sacrificing their maternity? Now, the drive behind secular feminism says, motherhood, that's passé, that's old school. We're done with that. Women are hard-nosed. They can carry a sword and wear armor and be a superhero. We don't need all that maternity stuff. And the women who have followed that path and listened to that message end up at, 40 years old or 45 years old. And yes, they climbed the corporate ladder and they became the best lawyer in the firm and the top-paid surgeon or whatever it is. And then they realize, I wish I'd had kids. I wish I'd had kids. God gave me a body. Mm-hmm. He gave me a nature. He gave me a desire for children. And I stifled that because I listened to that feminist message that said I have to beat out men at everything. And now I wish I had children. What would a just society that actually regarded the dignity of women look like? Is it just a society that pushes women to the head of every engineering class because we got to fill up that quota? Or maybe it's a society that says, we want to make it so that women can be engineers and mommies if they want to. And a culture that supports that choice. Or what if a woman says, you know what? Being a mother is a more sublime vocation than being the top-paid engineer or surgeon or architect or whatever. Mm-hmm. Are you going to look down on me? Is my society going to despise me because I think that's a more worthy or more noble choice?
Now, I think many people in our society do despise that choice. They do look down on women that choose maternity, that choose motherhood over, say, a professional career, even highly competent women that could beat you black and blue in a courtroom. But they'd rather love and raise their children. And respecting the dignity of women means we have to value that choice. Understand that husbands and wives, mothers and fathers are both essential for the maintenance of society, for the raising of children, for replenishing the culture, and for humane values that go beyond mere production, just making money. There's more to life than making money. And Pope John Paul said that women have a kind of genius, what he calls the genius of women, that men lack precisely in their attention to the person. And, you get a bunch of guys and gals in a room, and they'll be talking about the law case or the football game or whatever, and one kid cries down the hall. And every woman in the room, drops what they're doing and looks down the hall.
Yep.
And the men just keep going on the football. Right? I mean, that's the genius of women.
Sure, absolutely. So hope that's helpful for you, Janae. Thank you so much for your call from Ocala, Florida. It's called a communion here on EWTN. Hey, we have a brand new book on set with us today. It is Overcoming the Evil Within, brand new from EWTN Publishing from our friend Father Wade Menezes. Father Wade reflects on the reality, nature, and horror of sin, and he helps you guide in overcoming challenging issues, dependencies, addictions. Some of the highlights of this great book: what fear of the Lord really means, 4 consequences of every sinful act. 4 consequences, that is. Also, how to perform an effective examination of conscience. Sometimes this is really tough for people. And also, daily prayers to help you on your journey to sainthood. Can't recommend this book highly enough. It is Overcoming the Evil Within by Father Wade Menezes, brand new from EWTN Publishing. It is available right now at EWTNRC.com. Buy Catholic. Shop EWTN rc.com. Don't miss out on this great new book. It is called a communion here on EWTN. Here is Alec now in Moberly, Missouri, and he is a first-time caller. Alec, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I'm reading John Cashin in his Institutes, Book 12, Chapter 27, and referring to Jesus, he says, "I am not able to do anything of myself," he says, "but the Father who abides in me himself does the work." In the person of his assumed manhood, he says that he can do nothing by himself. How then can we, who are ashes in earth, think we do not stand in need of the Lord's help in whatever pertains to our salvation? And my question is, in relation to this and to the fact that Jesus is, according to John, filled with grace and truth, what is the Catholic understanding of grace in relationship to the inner Trinitarian relationship of grace? And how does that impact grace as we understand it as human persons being reached out to by God's grace?
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the question. So if I had more time, I was going to actually pull up the text of Thomas in the Summa where he discusses this exact question, and I don't have it at hand, so I'm just going to recommend to you to go to Book 3 of the Summa Theologica and read what St. Thomas writes about grace in the human soul of Christ. Okay. But in a nutshell, Christ, the person of Christ, because he was divine and human, the human soul of Christ was pervaded by grace, as we can also be pervaded by grace in a participatory manner. But of course, he experienced that grace in his human soul in a way radically different from the way we do, because we receive that in a created manner, in a sort of remote and participatory way. But Christ, the human Christ, was hypostatically united in his person to the Godhead. So it really, emerged from him. I mean, as a divine being. Mm-hmm. But there is an experience of grace in the human soul of Christ. Now, when we encounter God's grace, sanctifying grace in the sacraments through faith, and come to us through Christ and the atoning death of Jesus, the Church teaches that this is a participation in the divine nature in a created manner. But of course, Christ is united to the divine nature. The human Christ is united to the divine nature by way of the hypostatic union, right? In his very person, not in this created quality that we do that's infused into our souls, and which we can lose. We can lose the grace of God through mortal sin. Jesus, of course, couldn't possibly lose the grace of God. He is divine. But there's clearly an analogy, and all of the goods of the spiritual life that we receive through Christ because of the union of the divine and the human nature in him.
Okay. Alec, thank you so much for your call. Glad you're checking in there in Moberly, Missouri. Call to Communion here on EWTN. We're going now to Martha in Cleveland, listening on our great affiliate there, AM 1260, The Rock, a first-time caller. Martha, what's on your mind today?
Okay, so thank you for taking my call, and I'm trying to make it as clear as I can. I was given a book by one of my close relatives, and it's called A Theology of the Ordinary, and written by the author who teaches theology at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. Is also her and her husband write a lot of books for the LiveGodspeed.org, Godspeed organization or project. And as I was reading this book, I just want to take a look at it because it's part of her book study group or book sharing group, and it seemed like it was contradicting stuff about the Catholic faith. But then again, it was very pedagogical, so I don't know if I'm just stupid enough that I can read through this, that it's really a generic type of a good book, on how you everyday things that you do every day are important. You can make them holy. And I was wondering if you had read this book or if you know of this book or this organization.
Okay, so I haven't read it, and until this phone call, I hadn't heard of the organization, but just while we've been talking, I've done a little research. Okay, and I know enough now to make me a little wary. Okay. The author, who I'm sure is a person of goodwill, I do not believe is a Catholic, and in fact, I think has her academic work on the theology of John Calvin, who, of course, is a major Protestant thinker, and she teaches at a Protestant university, and in fact was awarded some accolades by Christianity Today, which is a major evangelical Protestant publication. So, not having read the book, but just based on the pedigree of the author, my suspicion would be that this book teaches a Protestant understanding of God and the moral life and of salvation, and that would definitely make me wary of taking it at face value. Now, if you are interested in a theology of the ordinary, so to speak, we got that in the Catholic Church. We got it in spades. We got it all day long. If I might recommend something much closer at hand, Mother Angelica was all about the theology of the ordinary. And we got reams of books by Mother Angelica available through EWTN publishers. If you want something a little bit more highbrow, right, Saint Jose Maria Escriva, who, of course, was sort of known for the theology of the ordinary and the spirituality of the ordinary and of daily life. He's kind of the big gun, if you will. But Mother Angelica would be great for the theology of the ordinary that's fully Catholic.
Okay, a couple of great sources for you there, Martha. Thank you so much for your call. Here is Jerry now in Buffalo, Missouri, listening on Sirius XM, Channel 130, a first-time caller. Hey, Jerry, what's on your mind today?
I was wondering if I could get some clarification on plenary indulgence. I understand you can seek it for yourself or for someone who's passed. I understand there's some other requirements, reconciliation, Eucharist, praying for the Pope's missions. But what I don't clearly understand is on an indulgence, it seems that it says that the indulgence is used to provide cleansing when you're in purgatory for sins that have been forgiven. And that seems to kind of contradict a little bit in my mind what I was taught about reconciliation.
All right, I can help you out. So I don't know if you have children, Jerry. I do. And this is an analogy I'm getting ready to give you. And if my kid comes in the house and I say, don't wear your muddy shoes in the kitchen, and then he tromps with the muddy shoes and he gets mud all over the kitchen floor, and I look down and I say, how could you possibly do that? I'm terribly offended. You didn't listen to me. You got mud all over the floor. And he looks up at me with the big baby doll eyes and he starts tearing up and he says, Dad, I'm so sorry. And I say, it is okay, son. I forgive you. We make up. I hug him. We are reconciled. All is forgiven. It's all good. He's forgiven. Then I say, there's a mop in the corner. Would you please clean up your dirty footprints?
Sure.
Cleaning up the dirty footprints is not the price of reconciliation with his Father. The price of reconciliation with his Father was saying, I'm sorry. He says, I'm sorry. I forgive him. It's all good. Cleaning up the dirty footprints is just making up for the mess he made. That's all it is. All right. When we go to confession, we say, I'm sorry, and the priest says, I absolve you. It's all good. We've been reconciled. That's what the word means. We are reconciled to our loving Father, and our relationship is made right. But penance is cleaning up the muddy footprints.
Sure.
Penance doesn't earn God's forgiveness. It just cleans up the muddy footprints. If we don't clean up all the muddy footprints in this life, we get to clean them up in the next life. And when we obtain an indulgence for a soul that's in purgatory, it's like when the older brother walks in and sees the young kid slaving away at the muddy footprints, and he says, I'll lend a hand. I'll lend a hand. We're just lending a hand with the muddy footprints. That's all it is. And it doesn't mean we're buying forgiveness. It doesn't mean that we've never been forgiven. We have been forgiven. We're just helping out with the muddy footprints.
All right. Jerry, thank you so much for your call. Here is Lourdes, or Lourdes, checking us out on Facebook today. Lourdes says, did Jesus know everything that he was to suffer? And if so, do we know when he knew all this?
Yes, Jesus knew everything that he was going to suffer. And of course, the second person of the Trinity knew in eternity past everything that he would have to suffer. And the human mind of Christ knew at the moment of his conception everything that he was going to suffer.
Okay. Oh, very good.
And so, yeah, I mean, he always had omniscience.
Okay. Very good. And here's an anonymous text that also came in during this hour. This person says, I often hear Catholics say that all people are children of God. Where does the church get this idea? What is the point of adoption through salvation if we're all God's children already?
I appreciate the question. The statement that we are all God's children is said infelicitously if we do not distinguish our sort of natural generation from our first parent Adam from our adopted sonship through Christ, right? And there is a special way in which we are adopted into God's family by grace that is distinct, that is different from the sense in which we are all God's offspring. Is there teaching in sacred Scripture that we are sort of all God's offspring, so to speak? Yes, Acts 17. That phrase is found precisely in Acts 17. The genealogy of Luke, when Luke gives Christ's genealogy, he traces Christ's genealogy all the way back to Adam, whom Luke identifies as the Son of God. Right? Not in the way that Christ was the Son of God, of course, but as God's offspring. And we're all sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. We're creatures of God. He made us. But we're dead spiritually, and we have to be reborn spiritually, not just by a natural generation, but a supernatural, spiritual regeneration by grace. And in that way, we are born again into God's family and adopted by him in a special way.
Very good. Thank you so much for your text. Unfortunately, we got a couple of calls toward the end of the program. Ryan can't get them screened quite that quickly, so here's my advice to you. Call early in the show so that there's enough time to get your call screened and hopefully get you on the air as quickly as possible. Dr. David Anders, thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Tom.
We do the program here on EWTN Radio 5 days a week live at 2 p.m. Eastern with an encore at 11 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio. We also bring you a best of Call to Communion, and that is on Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern. And of course, you can check out the podcast any time of the day or night by going to EWTNradio.net, EWTNradio.net. On behalf of our fantastic team behind the glass, Charles Beery, Ryan Penny, and Jeff Burson, I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders. See you next time here on EWTN's Call to Communion. Have a great day, and God bless.
This is Father Larry Richards. Do you want to know how to bring people to Jesus Christ? Well, find out next on Open